Yes, in the next moments, we are going to continue our study, and the title this morning, as we can look, is At the Border of Canaan. Now, for those of you who were there with us on Wednesday for the prayer meeting, you had the foundation already. But for the other ones, when you see this title, At the Border of Canaan, what thought comes to your mind? What?
The coming of Jesus.
The coming of Jesus. That's a blessed thought that we can look at. But if we look back into history, what do we have? We have the people of God, the Israelites, coming out of where? Egypt. So we see that they were in Egypt in slavery for many years. At that time, God provided who? Do you remember the name of the person that was Moses? So he was provided to deliver God's people from Egypt. So Moses came. They had a few disputes with the Pharaoh at that time. They were able to leave Egypt. And as they were leaving Egypt, do you remember what was their greatest trial? They met on the way, the first greatest trial, the Red Sea. And I want you to picture this, and it's an amazing act of faith. When you look at, they may be happy for a little bit. Going forward, they see the Red Sea. Now, even today, I don't believe there is a bridge crossing the Red Sea. But at that time, they arrived there. There is no bridge, there is no boat to take them. And besides that, when they would look backwards, they could see the army of Egypt. The army was following them to take them back into the slavery. So at this time, it was their greatest faith, where the test for their faith was there. And when we think about our experience, the Advent experience, somehow our experience is similar to theirs, especially the Advent experience. We know that in 1844, the Spirit of Prophecy mentions that we crossed the Red Sea. And what happened at the Red Sea? We mentioned already a great time when their faith was tested, but also in 1844, what happened then? People were waiting for Jesus to come. The second coming, yes. And it's something that we call the great disappointment. But I want you to think about this in a different way. It is a disappointment when you wish for something and that something doesn't happen, right? None of us is happy to go through that. But what happened to those that in trials they built their faith? Is it still a disappointment for them? Because the Bible also mentions that we should rejoice also in tribulations. So what do tribulation do in our life? Patience. In other words, it strengthens our faith, right? So what was the faith of the Advent people, those who crossed the Red Sea in 1844? Was it stronger? Yes, of course. Some of them, they lost their faith. Some of them, they even became atheists. Some of them, they went back to their former churches. But the ones that strengthened themselves, studying the scriptures, the ones that believed the prophecies, believed that the Bible cannot be a mistake, they strengthened their faith. And if you look at the early Advent movement, you'll see that these people were like the disciples. They had no fear for nothing. They were going from place to place, and I was reading about this pioneer that he would have maybe $10 in his pocket. He would buy a train ticket with all the money that he had, only one way. So he would go wherever the train would take him, and he would stop there and ask, who is the most faithful person in this city? And he would go and evangelize. And he would not leave that city until that person would be baptized. So these people that crossed the Red Sea in 1844, where they went through the great disappointment, as we see, their faith was strengthened. And no one could turn them down. Now, continuing this thought, where are we since 1844? If we crossed the Red Sea in 1844, what happened after Red Sea? What do you have after Red Sea? Is it Jericho? But before Jericho, what do you have? Wilderness. Wilderness. And when we think about the wilderness experience, and if you remember about Jacob, Jacob was fleeing his parents, his family, and he gives a descriptions about how wilderness looked like. During the day, he says that he was so hot, it was like I was dying because of drought. During the night, it was the opposite. It says that because of the cold, because of the frost, I couldn't even fall asleep. That was the wilderness experience. And more than that, about the people of Israel going through this experience, we see that so many times they found even different scorpions on the way. Now, is it pleasant in the wilderness? No. And yet we are there since 1844 to today. Now, as we look, their greatest faith was crossing the Red Sea. But every step they took, the Lord provided the way. And it's amazing, when I was a child, I thought that everything relates to where I was. Like, I didn't think there was another country in the world except the country I was from. I didn't think there is any other church except the church I went to. And one time, I think I was like 5 or 6 when we decided to rebuild, to redo the roof on the house. And what happens when you climb? You notice that the horizontal line moves further and further, right? So the same happens even when we are in these trials. When we are down there, what do we see? Only the trial. If we would get higher, what would we see? We would see how God would provide a way for us to go. The people at the Red Sea, they saw ahead of them only the waters. Behind them, they saw the army. But as they crossed, they could see that the horizontal line moves further and further. And every time they meet temptation, every time they meet trials, God will provide a way. And I mentioned about the heat during the day, the cold during the night. God provided flying AC with them during the day, a cloud. It would cover them and it would guide them. During the night, there was a pillar of fire. Gave them light, gave them warmth, right? So every time throughout their experience, God provided the way. Now, when we come back to our thought, because when I mentioned what picture comes in your mind when you think about Canaan, someone mentioned the heavenly Canaan. Do you think that it's God's will for us to be in the wilderness so long? No, 1844 to today is not so long time, but also it's not so short time. Was God's will for them to be in the wilderness for so long, in 40 years at that time? So then, what prolonged their wilderness experience? And I want us today to think about that, because it's a very similar experience with the Advent people experience. And you know the saying that if those that do not learn from the mistakes of others, or those that do not learn the history, they are doomed to repeat it. They will do the same mistakes as their fathers and parents did. So what prolonged their wilderness experience? And for this, I brought the thought from Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, page 284, paragraph 0. We see that we are told here that the experience of Christians in these days is much like the travels of the ancient Israel. And the advice that we have here is to read what? 1 Corinthians chapter 10, especially from verses 6 to 15. So this is the advice that we are told. In order to not repeat their mistakes, what shall we study? 1 Corinthians 10, especially 6 to 15. And of course, we are not going to take all the verses, but I want to bring to you just this verse 6. 1 Corinthians 6, 10, 6 says that now these things were our examples, were written for our examples. What does it mean, example? Why would you give examples sometimes? So an example is a pattern to follow, right? An example is something to imitate. So these things in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 6 to 15 were written for our examples, something to follow, something to imitate. And the next part of the verse says, to the intent we should not lust after the things, or after evil things, as they also lusted. So what is lust here? Because the first advice is, or the first thought is that this is our example. The first advice is that we should not lust after the evil things which they also lusted. What is lust? A desire. And if you remember the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 7, verse 7, he brings a thought there saying that, let's read the verse. It says that, what shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I have not known the sin, but by the law. For I have not known lust, except the law had said, thou shalt not covet. So what do we learn from this verse? Apostle Paul, before he read the law, he thought that he was a righteous man, right? He thought that he was a perfect man. And then when he read the law, what did he notice? He is a sinner. And I was reading something because, I remember one time in Romania, the roads or the villages, you have a main road and then you have houses on both sides. That's how usually these villages are. And you pass by a farm. And this time it was like a hog farm, like a pig's farm. And I don't know if any one of you crossed by there, how does it smell around? Awful, right? But what I noticed, because every time I knew that farm is there, as we were driving, we had to hold our breath while passing, right? But what I noticed is that many houses are around that farm. And one time I asked the question, how could these people live here? And you know what answer I got from the people that I was with? Well, the smell, you learn it. So there is something that we call blind smells, or smell blind. If you are associating yourself with that smell for a long time, the brain doesn't recognize it anymore. You live there, you may stink, but you may not realize where you are, right? Unless someone tells you, go take a shower or something. So that's what Apostle Paul is trying to say here. Was he a righteous person in the eyes of God? Was he a perfect person in the eyes of God? No. But did he know this? No. He thought everything is perfect. Everything is perfect. I don't know what these people are telling about the smell. I don't feel it. I don't smell it. So then he says, I have not known the sin, but by the law. And notice the next verses, because the question was, what is lust? He also says, I have not known the lust unless the law told me, you shall not covet. So what is lust in this situation, in this context? It's covetousness. And if you can go even deeper into that, what is covetousness? What is lust? It is sin. right? It is sin. So then as we study their wilderness experience, whatever they lasted after in those times, it is sin today. If we last after the same things, it is the same sin today. And the reason I brought this verse is because it's the first verse from that list. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 6 to 15. Now, when we think about their wilderness experience, what particular wilderness experience should be studied? Because their wilderness experience was for about 40 years. How many years do you need to learn details of 40 years? Sometimes as human beings, we are none of us the same. Some of us like one particular event, some of us a different event, and many times we tend to spend to learn that event that we neglect all the others. And this is the same with the scriptures. We learn one particular verse and we neglect all of the others. So, what particular event should we experience not to miss the point? And in the Bible commentaries, volume 2, 994, we see that we are told to study carefully the experience of Israel in their travels to Canaan. And we should study what? The third chapter and fourth chapters of Joshua, recording their preparation and passage over the Jordan into the promised land. So when they left Egypt, they met with the Red Sea. Now, how close was the Red Sea to the Canaan? It was a little far because it was right the next step after Egypt. But when they crossed Jordan, they were right next to the Canaan. So we are in the wilderness since 1844, and we want to believe that we are close to Canaan. So if we want to believe if we are close to Canaan, this is what we should study. Third and fourth chapters of Joshua. And in the third and fourth chapter of Joshua, we are not going to read those verses, but I encourage you to read these verses. Joshua chapter 3, chapter 4, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 6 to 15. Read the context and try to see the parallel or the context or the similarity between the Jewish people at that time and us as Advent people. So in chapter 3 and chapter 4 of Joshua, what was the only way for them to cross Jordan? The what? Dry foot, yes. But there is in chapter 3 and chapter 4 again, there is a special instruction that God gives to Israelites how to cross. And I put just the picture, I didn't put the verses. As you notice, first had to go the ark. And who carried the ark? The Levites or the priests. And then the people had to follow, right? Now, what do you think would have happened to the people if they misregarded this instruction? What would have happened to them if they decided to pass wherever they wanted, however they wanted? So what was the only way for them to cross? First, the priest. And it's amazing that even here, there was no boat, there was no bridge for them to cross. And even when the priests touched the water, they had no assurance that the waters will divide. But as they stepped in the water, then again, as the Red Sea, a path was made for them. At this time, the stream stopped to flow, and this way it was dry land for them to cross. And the thought I want to highlight here, they had to follow the ark. Now, why did God bring such an instruction or such a requirement? Why do you think? Trust in Him, yes. But what I want us to look at, Because in Exodus chapter 25, to understand what the ark was, Exodus 25, 21, 22, we read that, and thou shalt put the mercy seat above upon the ark, and in the ark thou shalt put the testimony that I shall give thee. And there I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubims, which are upon the ark of the testimony, of, of all things which I will give thee in commandment unto the children of Israel. So, what did the ark represent for them? When we look here, the Lord was communicating closely with his people. He was guiding his people. And where was the presence of God found? The mercy seat. And where was the mercy seat? You can see it here. It was where? Thou shalt put the mercy seat above the ark. And more than that, in the ark thou shalt put the testimony and everything that God gave him. And where would God meet with his people? He will meet with them, he will commune with them from above the mercy seat. So, in other words, what did it mean for them to follow the ark? Follow God, yes, that's the answer. They couldn't cross the Red Sea, they couldn't cross the Jordan River without following the presence of God. It is true that Moses was leading them, but who was the one leading Moses? God. And the same we have the picture of God's church. And Apostle Paul mentions that the church is like a body. You know, you have arms, you have fingers, you have all kind of members. How do they act? They act together, but who gives them the order to act? The mind, right? And who's the head of the church? Christ, right? God. So God was talking to Moses. He was leading the people through Moses, and Moses was able to instruct the people. And that's why following the ark was the only way for them to cross into the promised land. And in other words, as I mentioned, and it's amazing when you look at chapter 3 in Joshua, you'll notice that the waters over the Jordan were overflowing at that time. And when it's overflowing, and I remember this picture, in 2005, there was a great flood in our country. And there was this city, this river that was flowing. And I could see just before a bridge, there was a piece of wood, and that piece of, and also a cat. Cat and dog, they were living their life. The waters were overflowing. What would have happened if people would disregard the instruction? Drown. And not, in other words, when people were following, but for some reasons maybe they would have lost track, maybe they would get lost somehow. What would be the only way for them to find the right way? Where did they have to look to find the right way? They had to look where the mercy seat is. They had to look where the ark was, where the presence of God is. And this way they would find the way to cross the way. So the same thought is today. If we truly commune with him, if we would truly commune with him, we must go where? There where the ark is. For we must communicate with him in order to obtain eternal life. And this is the same principle from the beginning to the end. Even before Adam and Eve fell into sin, God gave them the calendar, 6 days of work. And then he gave them an extra day that they might meet with him. When they fell into sin, we see that later on, when the sanctuary where the tabernacle was made, do you remember what was the reason for the tabernacle to be made? That the Lord may abide with his people, that the Lord may dwell among his people. And through that cloud, through that pillar of fire, they knew that the presence of God is with them. So wherever they went, they had to follow the presence of God. And as often follow the presence of God, we see that as long as they follow the presence of God, they were successful. And the same it's even if you read in the book of Revelation, chapter 14, verse 4, I believe. Do you remember the characteristic of one of the characteristics of those who are sealed, or those victorious, is that they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. So it's the same today. If for some reason we feel like we are lost, if for some reason we feel like, well, maybe this is not the right church to go to. So many churches today, how do I know which one is the right? How do I know which one is the true Seventh-day Adventist church? The answer is right here. If we would truly communicate with him, we must go where the ark is. Because we will learn later on what did the ark mean for them. But let's see this question here. How did God prepare them to cross into the promised land? They needed a preparation. And the reason for this preparation we see is that, I believe I mentioned on Wednesday for those that were there, if you would leave seeds of anything, what would happen with those seeds? They would germinate and you will have the same fruits, right? And can you imagine what would have happened if they would have left Egypt and brought seeds, or the seed of sin, into Canaan? Their life would have been any different? No, it would be the same. Maybe they will not be under the slavery of Egyptians, but they would still be in the slavery of sin. So in order for them to be pure in Canaan, God provided a way for them to be transformed, or to change their desires. And how did God prepare them? And it was the ark. They had to follow the ark. They had to follow divine presence. And we already read in the book of Exodus that the divine presence was above the ark. So that means that whatever is in the ark was the foundation of God's throne, right? And in other words, if anything from that ark was missing, presence of God cannot be there. And we are going to study more into this. The first object to be placed there was what? The pot of manna. Now, later on, we have the Ten Commandments. And now the question might be, wasn't the Ten Commandments enough for them to be guided by God? Because the Ten Commandments are 10 words, 10 sayings of God. Wasn't the Ten Commandments, or the 2 tables of law, enough for them to prepare to enter into the land of Canaan? What do you think? Why was manna necessary? And notice that the manna was given even before the Ten Commandments were given. And I want you to think about those interviews when you see people that drive under DUI, right? And sometimes they crash. The police, it's interviewing them, trying to ask questions. Why did you drive? Why did you hit this car? Do you realize that you even killed some people? Do they realize do they assimilate this information, what the police is telling them? What do you think? Many times you think about, they say, well, I saw maybe 2 poles and I wanted to drive in between them, and they crash exactly in the middle. And sometimes if the police is telling them that, do you realize that you killed someone? Sometimes they even are about to laugh. They don't realize, they cannot assimilate this information unless they are out of that influence, right? So in other words, a sick mind, or a mind under some kind of influence, cannot assimilate the word of God. And would you keep talking to someone that doesn't understand you? And I remember one time I was giving studies to this person, maybe for a few months. And then I noticed that nothing comes out of her. And I started to make a review. and asking, do you remember this? And she says, no, I don't remember. It's like you never talked this. And I keep saying this. Now, would you keep talking to someone that never listens or never assimilates anything? It's like talking with no use, right? Would you keep telling your friend that keeps saying, well, I'll do it, and they never do it? You tell them once, twice, and then it's useless. It doesn't matter how many times you talk, that person doesn't change. So the same here, to avoid this, because coming out of Egypt under slavery, they were sleeping when the master told them to sleep. They were eating what they could when the master told them. If the master told them you work all day, they had no choice. So can you imagine what kind of health they had? Their mind could not assimilate the commandments that God wanted to give them. So for that reason, he gave them first the pot of manna. And when we think about the pot of manna, what was the pot of manna? What was the intent for the pot of manna? It was to clean their mind. And it's amazing, sometimes we don't like some food. But did you notice that when you fast for a few days, everything it tastes good? Everything tastes good. You would eat even anything, just to supply that need. So that was the intent that God wanted for them, to cleanse their bodies, to cleanse their mind, so they could assimilate the words that God gave them. And then later on, we have what next? So we have the pot of manna. The pot of manna was given so they could assimilate the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments were given, and then also the Aaron's rod. Yes, that body. Yes, this comes from the book of Numbers. And it's when you think about this, the reason God had a rod, it was because the people started to rebel against Moses. And I already mentioned that who was the one leading the people? It was God. And God chose Moses to lead the people. And the people didn't like it. And probably they were thinking, well, he's already old. Who's going to replace him? Who's going to be the next leader? They wanted that. And because they rebelled, God gave them also the sign of organization. And I made an affirmation earlier, and I want to come back to that. If any one of this is missing from the Ark of the Covenant, God's presence cannot be there. And for example, if the pot of manna is missing, God would still talk, but how many people can understand? Not many. If you have the pot of manna, and there are many people today, atheists, that they are vegan today. What good if they have not the word of God, right? So God's presence cannot be there either if you are healthy and you wouldn't listen. But do you think that God can be in a place of disorder? Do you think that God's presence can dwell in a place where everyone say, well, I want to do church the way I want to do it? Or it's exactly like the question I asked. What do you think would have happened if people wanted to cross into Canaan, cross Jordan River, wherever they wanted, however they wanted? So God cannot live in a place of disorder. Heaven is a place of order. And if we want God's presence to be among us today, what do we need? We need all of this, right? So that's why, if for some reason we are questioning sometimes which one is the true Adventist church, which one is the right place to go, is to look at the people that have the ark. Because if we neglect these things, what happens to us? God's presence is not among us, right? And it's essential for us to have God's presence with us if we would successfully enter Canaan. Now, coming back to the Advent people and the Advent experience, we see that the Lord is preparing us the same way. So God prepared Hebrews to go into Canaan, giving them the ark. They had to follow the ark. How is God preparing us to enter into the promised land? And we know from 1844 to 1850s, the church was establishing their doctrines. The fourth commandment, for example, it was forgotten for centuries. And at this time, the Lord helped them to see the doctrine, the true doctrine from the Bible. And then, this is what we would say the Ten Commandments. Then, in May 21st, 1863, the church was organized. And this would be also the Aaron's Rod, right? And then just a few weeks later, in June 6, 1863, health reform was given. And this is what? The pot of manna. Now, when you think about all this, and you see 1844, 1850s, doctrine was established, organization May  21st, 1863, health reform was given in 1863, a few weeks later, June 6th. Now, do you think that the church had everything necessary for them to enter Canaan since this time? They had it. They had it. Everything is there. And the question comes, why are we still in the wilderness today? Everything needed for our preparation. And we know that in order to enter Canaan, we need to follow God's presence. And can you follow someone if you don't understand their language? No. They may talk to you. Sometimes people smile to you and they say bad things, and you don't know what they are saying. So, in order to understand God's language, what do we need? We need a pot of manna. When you have the pot of manna and you clean your mind, you cleanse your mind, then you are able to understand God's commandments, or the doctrine, the biblical doctrine, where God's orders, how to follow. And then again, without organization, God's presence cannot be in our midst. So from 1863 to today, we have everything, all the needs, all the means to prepare for them to enter into Canaan. And what I want to make it clear today, that Jesus is ready to come. Because many times when we think about the people in Israel, the people, why they were still in the wilderness for so many years. Do you know that they could have entered Canaan in just about 11 days? If they would have gone straight, they would have entered Canaan right away. But what prolonged their wilderness experience? And we already mentioned that it was maybe unbelief, right? Unbelief. And I want you to think about this, because the promise was given many years before, even to Abraham, that they will enter into a land where there is milk and honey, right? Do you remember the promise? They had this promise, and this promise was with them ever since they left Egypt. They arrived to the border of Canaan, and they sent some, how do you call those, spies, right? What was the reason of those spies? They had to scout the country. They had to look to see how is it. And what was their report? We are thinking about the 10 of them. Yes, they got there and they say, well, it's true. There is a country where flowed with milk and honey. And I don't know if you remember the picture of that we see in the children's book when they come out with a grape, a huge grape. Yes, it is true. This is the fruit. But do you know that in this country there is people, giants. They even eat their inhabitants. And remember what they were saying, that when we looked at our stature and we looked at their heights, we looked like grasshoppers, right? In other words, what was their report? That this country is exactly as it was promised, but this country, it's impossible to conquer, right? Now, what did they forget from this story? Yes. Did ever God tell them that you go there, you fight, you do everything? No. God told them that the country I will give you, the country that I will give you, You just have to have it, right? Um, the reason I'm bringing this is because many times as we read the characteristics in Revelation chapter 14, we see that in order to be sealed, what do you need? You need so many things. And we are excited about heaven. We dream about heaven. We want to enter in heaven. But when we read those things, we realize that it's impossible for me to be that way, right? But what do we forget in that picture? That it is God, the one that creates in us that kind of character. And He provided the means that we may enter, that we may develop that kind of character. So Jesus is ready to come. And here in Revelation chapter 7, this is a chapter where we usually describe it as the angels are sitting at the four corners of the earth holding the winds. Yes, it's true that this is what they are ending up doing, but they were sent for a different reason. And I want you to look at the verses 2 and 3. It says that I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the four angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea. And look at the command. So what were they sent to do? They were sent to hurt the earth. They were sent to destroy the earth and everything, the sea, because Jesus was ready to come, right? And verse 3 says, the command came again, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. So what was the reason that the second coming of Christ couldn't happen? The people were not ready. Yes, they were not ready. They were not prepared. So why are we still in the wilderness? The people, as a church, we are not ready. So first of all could be unbelief. They didn't enter into Canaan because of unbelief. But what was the second option? And I want you to think about the thought. And here I will read this paragraph and then we'll comment more. It says that the antitypical land of promise is just before us, and Satan is determined to destroy the people of God and cut them off from their inheritance. The admonition, watch and pray, lest ye enter into temptation, was never more needed than now. So think about, how did Satan try to destroy or to cut off the people of Israel from their inheritance? And if you look at the Bible history, none under the age of 20 was able to enter into Canaan, except Joshua and Caleb. So how did Satan destroy them? How did Satan keep them in the wilderness? When God gave them the pot of manna, they refused it. When God gave them the organization that was coming from God, they refused it. They rebelled it. And later on, you will see that even the Ten Commandments, they transgressed it. So the first reason is unbelief. The second one, it's this. When God gives us things, we refuse them. And it's amazing that even when we talk about the pot of manna today, many people come and say, well, but the Lord cleansed some foods to eat, right? There are some certain things that we are, as God's people, we can eat biblically. But when we think about that, where are we looking to? Do we look towards Egypt or do we look towards Canaan? So as long as we look towards Egypt, there is no way for us to enter Canaan. So let us stop looking towards Egypt and let us embrace everything that God gives. Because when we think about how did Satan try to destroy them, he made them reject the preparation that God gave them. And we could also lose the ark if we reject its message. And this is the last thought from this morning. We see that when God shall work his strange work on the earth, when holy hands bear the ark no longer, woe will be upon the people. Oh, that thou hast known, even thou, in this thy day, the things that belong unto thy peace. So there is this saying that many people come and say, well, this is the church that my parents brought me up. This is the church where my parents were buried. This is the church that I should never leave. But what should be the criteria when we think about church? We should look for the presence of God. We should look for the ark because the ark can be taken away from us. And even some do not bear it, it will always go onward. There is a people who will bear God. Some will go out from among us, who will bear the ark no longer, but this cannot make walls to obstruct the truth, for it will go onward and upward to the end. And what I want us to take from this morning, how is the Lord preparing us? Because we are just at the border of Canaan. How is the Lord preparing us to cross into the promised land? He gives us the pot of manna. And when He gives us the pot of manna, we speak about health reform, right? This is needed in order to understand God's guidance. Then God gives us, of course, when the ark was made, the pot of manna was placed inside, but the pot of manna was rejected by Israel. And it's amazing that once rejected, God removed it from them. And in the Second Chronicles, chapter 5, verse 10, this is the time when the temple was built by Solomon. When we read about the Ark of the Covenant, there is only the Ten Commandments in it. So the pot of manna, God gave it to them. They rejected it. God took it away from them. God gave them the organization. They rejected it. They rebelled against it. God took it away from it. And think about the reason why did they have to go back into slavery. What was the reason they had to go to Babylon? Breaking the commandments of God. And in Isaiah and Jeremiah, it's always stated that if you should keep the Sabbath, if you should obey the Sabbath, then none of these diseases will come upon thee. You shall not be taken into slavery. But because they ended up even transgressing the Ten Commandments, just before they went to Babylon, what happened to the Ark of the Covenant? It says the history that the holy hands hid the Ark of the Covenant that no one could find it again. So as we reject one by one, those are taken away from us. And as we reject even the Ten Commandments, the entire presence of God is gone from us. So may the Lord help us that as we learn from this history, and we noticed already that from 1863, the church has all the means to prepare itself to enter into Canaan. So may the Lord help us that we may look towards the new Canaan, that we may embrace all those things that were in the ark and prepare and be ready to enter into Canaan when Jesus comes. Amen.
Amen.